What's going on, everybody? It's just another day in the kitchen, and today we'll be celebrating the 9th anniversary of Travis Scott's Rodeo album by reviewing the merch that he dropped along with it, as well as telling the story behind the action figure. Now, before we get started, I want to give a special shout out to the homie Strain Beats, who's been cooking up the beats for these videos, so make sure you guys check them out. And while you're here, you might as well drop a like and subscribe and join our free Discord to stay up to date with the latest and the greatest. Shout out to all of my chefs in there. Now, like I just mentioned in the intro, in today's video we'll be celebrating the 9th anniversary of Travis Scott aka La Flame's debut album release titled Rodeo, and if I told you this wasn't my favorite Travis Scott album, I'd probably be lying. Now, with that being said, and given that we just celebrated the 8th anniversary of Travis's Birds in the Trap Sing McKnight, which just passed 2 days ago, I figured what better day to celebrate Rodeo than today. So in today's video, we'll be taking a look at some of the Rodeo merch drops that occurred in support of Travis's iconic debut album. And like I mentioned in the intro, we'll also be taking a look at how the now legendary Travis Scott action figure was not only available for sale, but also how it made its way onto the now iconic album cover. Now, back in 2015, XXL magazine covered the Rodeo drop, and as you can see from Travis's name, he still had the $sign in his name back then. So for those of you that didn't know, now you know. When it comes to this actual Rodeo merch, it was hard to find pricing, but I did see that the collection ranged anywhere from $18 to $275. And I also wanted to point out that I know I've been covering all of his other album releases, so I just wanted to shout out everybody that recommended that I make this Rodeo merch review along with a couple of other real ones that I've been talking to, so I appreciate every single one of you. Now, if you didn't know, back in 2015, the album was super hyped up given that it was his first debut album, and it initially released on September 4th, 2015. I wanted to point out that on the Rodeo tour, he was on tour with Young Thug, and shout out to my guy Jeffrey one time. Everybody drop a free Young Thug in the comments. And this Rodeo tour was super important for Travis because it laid the foundation for him to see just how lit and live his shows would be, as long as how hard his fans would go. I also wanted to point out my favorite song on the album features Bieber, of course that's Maria I'm Drunk, and let me know your favorite song in the comments. Now, when it comes to merch, the first thing I have to cover is of course the most iconic piece from the collection. And you might be wondering what that is, and we're actually looking at it right now. On the Rodeo cover, Travis Scott used an action figure that he then ended up dropping on his website. Now, like I said, the actual website itself was hard to find, however I was able to find the screenshot of when the actual toy or action figure dropped, and let me know in the comments if you think this thing is hard. I definitely regret not being able to get my hands on it back in the day. Now, while we're looking at the actual drop from the website, I want you guys to think about just how much you would actually pay for this. If you ended up guessing that the retail for this was going to cost $150, you were correct. And you might be thinking that's a little bit steep for an action figure, but let's go ahead and take a look at just how much it costs today if you wanted to get your hands on it. Yup, you see that right, the last sale was $880, and it's not uncommon for sales of the action figure to go over $1,000, so if you want to get your hands on them, I wish you the best of luck, and let me hold a couple bucks. Now, when it comes to this merch, it was very different from the rest of his album merch drops because it was only available for 72 hours, so if you weren't able to cop within the first 3 days, you were out of luck. Now, before we get into the rest of this collection, I also wanted to start off by showing off my favorite t-shirt. The retail on this was apparently $40, and personally, I think it's a great pickup, especially 8 years later. I think it still fits even with this Utopia aesthetic and collection. Now, like I said at the beginning of this video, it was a little bit difficult to do research on this merch drop because it was 8 years ago and there wasn't a whole lot of information available. And yeah, you can always Google Travis Scott Rodeo merch, but there are so many fake pieces, I wanted to make sure that we only focused on the ones I can guarantee were real and part of the drop. A lot of people have made a lot of money making fake merch, and that's not something I wanted to cover in this video, but to each their own. As you can see, the merch was pretty limited in terms of the amount of tees and hoodies, however there was still variety all the way back in 2015, a whole 8 years ago. The drop also featured some pretty dope socks we're going to take a look at in just a moment, an iPhone case which you can tell just how dated that model was, and something we've seen in every single album merch drop apart from Utopia, some kind of smoker item such as a lighter or in this case an ashtray as well. So I think it's safe to say that my boy La Flame definitely had us stoners in mind, and shout out to all of y'all that are geeked while watching this video. Now if you're like me, whenever I don't know something I go to Reddit, and I was actually able to find some dope information about shipping when it comes to this merch. Even for you international people, I feel for you for this Utopia drop, but take a look at the fact that this person bought 3 items and it was only $28 US to ship to Australia. Next up, we've got somebody that lived in Canada that was able to pick up a Rodeo merch tee for only $12. And I think that's pretty crazy because I know some of you guys were getting hit with fees all the way up to $50-60 bucks just to ship an item. So I feel for you guys, and shout out to all of you international ragers. And next up, we're looking at the Rodeo bomber jacket collection that Travis was wearing at the beginning of this video. The retail on this ran up to $275, and I read that the quality was horrible, and a lot of people regretted picking it up, which is kind of disappointing. And I also read that the majority, if not all of the Rodeo merch was printed on low quality stuff like Gildan material, and back in 2015 it wasn't the greatest. Now next up, we're looking at one of my favorite hats Travis has ever dropped, which is the Rodeo dad hat right here. And if you wanted to add this one to your collection, it was going to cost you a retail price of $40. My favorite feature is probably this Rodeo stitching that's on the back of the hat, and as somebody that wears a lot of hats, I know I was going to wear the hell out of this one if I ever got my hands on it. As you can see, it doesn't really have a shape or structure, which might mean it's kind of low quality, but I'm not going to hold it against LaFlame because of course this was part of his first ever merch drop, so it is what it is, and I know the quality of his hats and his merch have definitely gotten better over the years. Now one thing I always appreciated about Travis is the fact that he actually wore his merch. The same pieces that were available to fans, he was always spotted repping them, and I know so many artists that have just dropped merch and are never spotted wearing it, which I think kind of takes away from how special these actual collections are. Here's another low quality picture, but as you can see, LaFlame was faded and still spotted wearing his own damn Rodeo merch, so shout out to you, Travis. Now next up, we're taking a look at this dope A-Team jacket, which featured some pretty hard and blazing patches. As you can see, we've got the flag of Texas, the Cactus Jack logo, a horseshoe, and some more Rodeo branding, which honestly I think is really sick. These next few pieces I don't think are super crazy, but again they feature the Rodeo branding and the always present and always famous cactus that Travis Scott has adopted and incorporated into his style. Now this next hoodie I think is super generic and it's just a stock photo of some flames. However, I get it because we're talking about none other than Travis Scott, aka LaFlame. But I will also point out that the hoodies were going anywhere from $55 to $75. Next up, we're looking at a dope tee here that features the disassembled Travis Scott Rodeo action figure, and honestly, if I could go back in time, I would definitely pick it up. Here's the first long sleeve that we have available to us, and the funny thing about this is I've actually seen that cactus as a stock image when I've tried to create Travis Scott thumbnails, so that one's kind of lazy. And following up with the cactus here, of course Travis had to drop some cactus themed leggings. I couldn't find an exact price on retail for these, but again, I think they're a little bit lazy but also kind of hard at the same time. Now this next Rodeo merch tee is actually really hard, and I think it's a dope tribute to the old vintage rap tees we used to see. And personally, I really like it because it really shows how much Travis's merch has matured and evolved over the last 8 years leading up to the most recent Utopia drops. Now personally, I think that the Rodeo 3-pack of socks was actually really dope, and for a price of $25, it's about standard when it comes to these merch drops. And I think they're definitely pieces that I would wear myself, especially along with some dope Travis Scott sneakers. So let me know in the comments if you agree, and what's your favorite merch piece that we've seen so far. Now coming up, we've got to take a look at these dope Rodeo themed Zippo lighters. If you didn't know, the Zippo brand has been around since like World War II, and they're very iconic lighters. Even if you're not a smoker, I think that these would be really sick and dope to add to anybody's collection, and I personally like this one right here, which has the now iconic burning cactus, which was only seen during this Rodeo era. Next up, of course, we've got the ashtray to go with this collection when you're smoking. And personally, I think that horse head or cow's head is really dope, although I don't think I would actually use this ashtray, and I would more so keep it as kind of a collectible because I think it's pretty hard. Now I wanted to include some comments all the way back from 8 years ago just so you could see how far opinions have changed. Someone goes on to call Travis Scott a flavor of the month, and a lot of people were saying that back in the day he wasn't rapping about anything. Now I wanted to take the time to also point something out about accessibility when it comes to this merch. This drop was 8 years ago, and if you really want to get your hands on it, there are some legit pieces out there. I did find some on this website called Grailed, which is super famous for selling streetwear stuff like this, but my biggest advice and opinion when it comes to looking for this merch, because there is so much bootleg and fake pieces out there, that you remember my #1 rule. If the price is too good to be true, it probably is. But to show you an example of one of the tees I highlighted in this video, this price of $283, formerly $350, would make sense given that the tee is 8 years old. Always check out the history of the seller, and as you can see, this person has 146 reviews, and apparently it's also been authenticated, as you can see from this little guarantee right here. So just keep that in mind if you're really trying to get yourself some real pieces from this rodeo merch era. Now with that, I just had to highlight the fact that Travis has definitely come a long way. From the rodeo action figure to Utopia that we've had now, I think it's safe to say as a fan since then that this dude does not miss. And if you made it this far, at this point, let me know what your favorite merch drop has been from all of his albums. I just wanted to shout out every single one of you that watches these videos and has subscribed over the last few weeks. Making these videos has definitely been the highlight of my day, and interacting with you guys and seeing your comments definitely motivates me to keep going. And I know I can't keep making Travis Scott merch videos forever, so if you guys want to see me cover other artists, let me know in the comments, and also what other types of videos you'd like to see. Now the story behind the Rodeo album cover starts off 8 years ago, all the way back in 2015, after Sony Music and Epic Records reached out to Dan Chung, a veteran of figurine making with over 20 years of experience. Now Dan would later go on to mention in an interview that Travis's initial idea was born out of the concept of rewarding fans for purchasing merch, similarly to the way that you would find a toy in a Cracker Jack box. But luckily he was able to convince both Travis and his team to allow him to work on a scale figurine, because that was the area of expertise that he had been working in over 20 years. And it was while spending time with Travis in his mansion in the Hollywood Hills that Dan would also notice just how much of an artist Travis Scott really was. He goes on to mention in the interview that he noticed Travis Scott was more obsessed with becoming a great artist and performer rather than being obsessed with the whole celebrity image. And as a big fan of LaFlame, I'm not surprised to see just how much Travis's art meant to him all the way back in 2015. Now interestingly enough, Dan goes on to mention that he wanted to have Travis Scott's figurine wearing Yeezys, however they weren't able to pull off the collaboration in time. And when you think about it, I wonder if there would have been any consequences for Travis Scott's eventual Nike and Jordan deal had he started collaborating with Adidas all the way back in 2015. And after trusting Dan and his vision, Travis had the following reaction when he first saw the photo.
Oh my jeez. Probably gotta save it for them.
Yeah, wait.
Cover the dog. That's top secret. Really some shit.
Andrew, that's Travis, that's Andrew. We're not getting out.
Now Travis Scott, being the merch king that he is, decided to do something different with the release of his first album Rodeo, and he actually made this iconic album cover figure available for purchase. Yep, that's right. For those of you that weren't around for the Rodeo drop, you could actually purchase this Travis Scott action figure for a cool retail price of $150. Now looking back in hindsight, I have a very hard time not beating myself up over not having picked up this piece when it first dropped, because if you want to get your hands on it today, it's going to cost you a cool retail north of $1,000, as you guys can see from this most recent sale on StockX. Now when I was doing my research for this video, I did see that there were unfortunately not that many pieces of this one produced, so the crazy retail price definitely makes just a little bit more sense. And although LaFlame has definitely dropped his fair share of dope collectible pieces throughout the years, I can't help but feel like this is the most iconic piece for myself, especially because Rodeo is tied for probably my favorite Travis album. And while we've now seen that it was the work of Dan Chung, the industry veteran who produced this amazing Travis Scott action figure, it was also the combined works of Kevin Amato, the photographer, who ended up taking this now iconic Rodeo album cover. And if his name sounds familiar, that's because it is, as it was only the previous year in 2014 that Kevin worked with Travis to shoot the album cover for his now legendary mixtape Days Before Rodeo, as you guys can see here. It was in an interview with Complex Magazine in 2015 that Kevin would share just how Travis Scott himself had to defend him and fight for him to be the photographer for the Rodeo album. Sony Music apparently had issues with Kevin being the photographer, given that he wasn't used to shooting figurines. However, Travis trusted him and knew exactly what he wanted, and I would say that they came up with an iconic album cover. And it was while I was researching Dan's interview that he also mentioned that Billboard ranked this album cover among the top 25 covers of the year, and Complex rated it the #2 album of the year. And although I think it's safe to say that fans and ragers like myself who were listening to the album back in 2015 knew that Travis Scott was going to be a star someday, I thought it was really cool to see the support that he started to get from other A-list celebrities as he was growing into his role. And while I was doing research for this video, I actually came across these funny photos of LaFlame having gifted comedy legend himself, Seth Rogen, his very own Travis Scott action figure. And although I have no way to reach out to Seth, I'd love to know if he still has it today because that'd be a pretty cool memento. And although I wasn't able to get my hands on this piece when it first dropped all the way back 8 years ago, I did come across this video review and unboxing that I thought you guys would appreciate. And something really dope that I wanted to point out while reading Dan's interview is that he mentioned part of the way he was able to convince Travis and his team to allow him to build such a large-scale figurine was the fact that they would be able to then mass produce these items and objects for the fans. He goes on to mention that no other artist or rapper has produced or mass-produced such an item for the fans, and not only would it be an iconic piece of art, but also just an iconic piece of merch. And when you think about where Travis Scott was with his level in 2015, given that he wasn't the largest artist, I think it's actually so raw that he was able to actually produce this and put this out for his fans. And something I wanted to point out while taking a look at the retail price here together is that in hindsight, although the retail price of $150 for this figurine was definitely pretty steep, especially for where Travis Scott was as an artist at the time, if you're familiar with just collectibles and being a hobbyist, you know that a lot of these things can get pretty damn pricey. So for example, I just wanted to show you guys how some of these like anime figures can run up to the hundreds or even thousands of dollars. So $150 for your very own LaFlame here I think is pretty reasonable. Something else I found dope while reading over Kevin's interview that I felt was worth sharing was he mentioned that the secrecy surrounding this Travis Scott action figure was top notch. Instead of this piece being mailed all over, people were actually flying with it to avoid any kind of leaks, and Travis Scott wanted to keep it under wraps, which I definitely understand. And when speaking about his vision for the Rodeo album art, Kevin goes on to mention that fans shouldn't take the word rodeo too literally. He mentions instead that rodeo is kind of the experience that fans should find once they get lost as they listen to the album. And he goes on to end his interview with the following quote that I thought was pretty cool. He mentions that Travis makes rodeo an emotion. It's Texas, it's Houston, it's a vibe, so when the album drops, you'll definitely feel a rodeo. And although we haven't quite seen a restock of this OG rodeo figure, I had to of course mention the Travis Scott Fortnite event that took place just a couple of years ago. Because it was during this event that we actually got our second iteration of Travis Scott action figures, and if you guys would like a separate video on this one, let me know in the comments because I'd love to cover it as this event was actually pretty damn crazy. Now if you made it this far in the video, thank you so much for watching and I'd love to know what you guys think about this one in the comments. As someone that's been a fan for basically a decade at this point, I can't believe I'm making this video celebrating 9 years since the release of Rodeo. And while I used to get some ugly looks and people looked at me crazy when I would tell them that Travis Scott and Kanye were my favorite artists, it's honestly really dope to see people come around and change their opinions a whole decade later. So as always guys, thank you so much for cooking with the kitchen and let me know what you guys think about this one in the comments. I think it's really dope to be able to look back at these archival videos and see just how far Travis Scott has evolved, and if you have any pieces from this collection, I'd love to know and I'm honestly very jealous of you. Now as always, remember to stay safe out there guys, and remember, it's lit straight up and peace.